So coming in at just over $200, the Umi Plus E absolutely steamrolls the competition in terms of specifications, but let's see if that translates to a better mobile experience. Welcome to my full review. So starting with the design, I have to say I really like what's going on here. The entire outer casing is just one slab of aluminium alloy, so it feels very strong, very solidly constructed, and quite surprisingly for something that comes at this price point, almost like a luxury item. It's got a high screen to body ratio, but unfortunately the aluminium alloy makes it a really dense smartphone. Even though it's not exactly huge, it feels weighty in the hands, a little bit more than perhaps is comfortable. Something else I noticed is that whilst it does have curves on the bottom, those curves lead to some pretty sharp jagged edges, so they can dig into your hand a little bit. Structurally, it's not quite as well designed as smartphones like the Google Pixel, which yes is a more expensive handset, but all I'm saying is you can tell the difference. It also attracts a lot of fingerprints which are really annoying and hard to remove. Now the phone does have a couple of pieces of interesting hardware, namely a physical camera button, a physical home button which does press in with a built-in fingerprint scanner, and some capacitive keys which don't light up. Once set up, the fingerprint scanner is amazing. It's intuitive to press and very fast to unlock, but the capacitive keys kind of threw me off a little bit. Because they don't light up, they're quite hard to press. So internally, this guy is an absolute monster. We've got 6GB of RAM and the brand new Helio P20, which for those of you who don't know is pretty much the company's direct replacement for the Helio P10. It's a true octa-core chip with an overclocked GPU and an overclocked CPU. And for the most part, the results are impressive. Once you're actually in an application, once you're in a game and you're playing, then performance seems to be great. It flies through almost every 2.5D, 3D, 2D game. It doesn't really matter so much. You should be getting at least 30 frames per second on any modern title. Unfortunately though, this just isn't the fastest smartphone experience. Day-to-day tasks don't really feel any faster than an average mid-range smartphone. The Helio P20 and the 6GB of RAM seem to be almost a little bit underused in most situations. It's not slow by any means, but just feels a little bit less responsive than it could be. The display is pretty good too. We've got a 5.5-inch 1080p panel, which is plenty sharp enough, but unfortunately contrast isn't that high. You can see the company's applied some sort of over-sharpening effect to the screen, so photos don't look particularly natural, and unfortunately it's just not quite bright enough to be fully usable outdoors, but a lot of smartphones at this price point struggle with the same thing. Whilst it might look and sound like there are two speakers on the smartphone, sound is actually provided through one speaker and then separated into two compartments. But it sounds pretty good nonetheless. It's loud, it's clear, it's fairly bassy, and vocals and voices sound really good. The Plus E also has great battery life. It's got 4000 mAh of juice on one hand, and on the other hand, a lot of options to save your battery in intelligent ways. Even in terms of its camera specs, the phone defies what we'd expect from this price. It uses a 13-megapixel Samsung sensor, even capable of 4K recording. And for the most part, it works well. The photos are detailed, shutter time is fast, so you don't really get too much blur in the shots. But whilst the photos are detailed, a lot of the time they do lack vibrancy. There's not enough saturation, there's not enough contrast here, and whilst you can fiddle that manually, it's a bit of a pain. On the bright side, it's got a great aperture. It's really good for blurring out backgrounds, and even indoor shots when you tone down the lighting, it copes surprisingly well. The front camera has a nice combination of detail and fast shutter time, but does have a slightly red tinge. Unfortunately, whilst the video is 4K, sometimes you wouldn't believe it. Videos get quite grainy when you lower the lighting conditions, and sharpness isn't quite there. On the software side of things, we're based off Android 6.0.1, which is just about still acceptable. On the bright side though, I really like what Umi's actually done with the software, which is for the most part it's left it alone. There's very little bloatware, but it's also added in quite a nice looking dark theme. The Plus E also has a couple of nice touches, like the ability to introduce a virtual navigation bar, something I found myself using, and a customizable RGB notification LED. Storage-wise, the phone ticks all the boxes. We've got 64 gigs internally, as well as the ability to add another 256. That's just huge. It also supports fast charging, which works well, but I did have a couple of problems with the USB-C cable just kind of dropping out of the smartphone. So guys, that is the Umi Plus E. And whilst in terms of its specifications it's an absolute monster, in terms of day-to-day performance it doesn't quite live up to the upper echelons of what we expected it to. Having said that, given its specifications, it's quite easy to forget how much this guy actually costs. And when you compare it to similarly priced handsets, it absolutely aces them in terms of performance, in terms of storage, in terms of battery. And for that it should be commended. So overall I have to say it's a great smartphone, even if it's not quite where we might have thought it would be. Thanks a lot for watching, I'm Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'm signing out.